need a high-end designer or a lot of money to get a luxe look. Be your own interior designer.
This is Affordable Interior Design, the podcast.
Here's your host, Betsy Helmuth.
Hello there, everybody. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're staying somewhat cool in this heat. Love the heat. No complaints here, even though it's been a little bit oppressive the past few weeks. But overall, so happy and planned mini beach days ahead of today. Couple things just before we launch in. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that I'm super cash, no makeup, t-shirt, my Dragonfly in Gilmore Girls t-shirt from my adventures in Connecticut, and sunglasses on my head. The number one reason why I'm so super cash is because my daughter is sleeping in my room, much to our babysitter's dismay. She's like, is that baby sleeping in her own crib by now? And I'm like, no, she's in a pack and play in my room. And that's how it's going to be until she's 16, because I just love having her close to me. But then the other thing is that I'm trying to camouflage my hair because, oh, well, I forgot to expound upon why I can't go. So the baby's napping in my room where I keep my makeup and where I keep my clothes. So there we go. That answers that question. Next part is, what is wrong with your hair, Betsy? When the baby was born and before that, things were busy. I was a little bit overwhelmed. I was not maintaining my look. I had highlights before that to cover the grays and just to have kind of a nice look. But every time I'd go to the salon, I'd be a little bit disappointed. Like, it would never really be the outcome I wanted. I just haven't found that perfect place to go where you're going to get the outcome you want. And when you do highlights, the next time you go, you either have to get more highlights or low lights. So it was either always too light or too dark, and it was frustrating and expensive. So when I was pregnant and then after having the baby, I'm like, I'm not doing this anymore. I don't know if I saw on Instagram or Facebook, or I don't know, but I saw a woman using Just for Men, the shampoo. So it's a shampoo, kind of henna-based color that you can shampoo into your hair, and it gradually changes your color and also mostly covers your grays. And I was like, yes, that is what I'm going to do. Now, little did I know, when you put that over existing color and existing roots, now I had like 3 different colors of hair going on. I had my roots, I had the highlights, and then I had the base color. And I had this, it was the only box at CVS. So I didn't pick from a batch of colors. I really was just, I don't know, maybe it was hormonal. I just picked up the box, the only one that was left on the shelf, and began using it. So it was this very dark, ashy brown, almost gray black, if you will. And it was really just too dark for me, but it was doing the trick. It was covering the grays and just getting me by. But I finally decided, my baby's 9 months old. It is time for me to re-splurge, to get this color out of my hair, to find a look that can sustain me for at least a little while, to get a little bit more high maintenance, if you will. So I go to the salon and he takes out the color and he says, okay, so what do you want to achieve? Because I've got like this bleach blonde tone after he stripped everything out. And I say, I want a medium brown, or just a brown, just my original color. I came out with orange hair. The one thing I told him is, I don't want anything red. Well, I didn't get red. I got orange. I got like carrot top orange. I got, as my daughter said when she saw me walk in the house, Wendy's, the mascot of Wendy's, Wendy. I got Wendy's hair color. So the reason that this pertains at all to interior design, as I think that sometimes this happens with our room. We decide that, yes, we're willing to invest. Yes, we are worth the transformation. It is going to really pay off in our lives. And then sometimes the results are lackluster, or we've made this big investment in a rug or in a sofa or in a piece of art, and it comes and it's just not everything we thought it was going to be. And how do you manage those expectations with the reality? Even in high-end interior design, this can happen. I've worked on projects that had very big budgets and we were spending a lot of money. And, the good thing about those high budget projects is they will let you take these things out on loan. So we could try 3 different rugs in the light and return the ones that we didn't like. We could, go sit on the sofa and get the exact foam that we were looking for because everything would be custom. So there was a lot more kind of trial before commitment. But in the affordable space, you just aren't allowed to do that. I mean, certainly you can buy the item, unfurl it, and if it doesn't work, return it within the window. But oftentimes you've got a restocking fee or you have to pay the shipping. So it's not without some penalty. And what fights are worth fighting? And what things do you just need to kind of compromise on in terms of your vision, right? So, for instance, with my hair, I called him the very next day and was like, oh no. In the salon, they kind of would convince you that it's fine and convince you that it's not too bad. And then you walk in and your daughter calls you Wendy and you're like, oh my God, it's as bad as I thought. Because his assistant was being like, Betsy, it's fine. And he was saying, oh, it looks so fabulous. It's so much better than it was. And maybe it is better than it was. But what I recommend with my clients as well as with myself, my husband said, how do you like your hair? And I said, I always give it a few days because my initial reaction is just a reaction to change. And it's not always the right reaction or the reaction I'll have in a week or two. So whenever I'm making a big change with a client, I tell them, give it 2 weeks. 2 weeks is always, with an asterisk, almost always within the return window for the vendors. And it allows them to see the pros and cons of the thing in their room because sometimes we're just reacting to some kind of change, especially if we're also changing the layout of the furniture so that you're using these bad feelings. You're blaming a piece like a rug, artwork, drapes. You're blaming the drapes for your bad, uncomfortable feelings when it's really the fact that you changed the room around. You've moved the functions, or the sectional now looks out the window instead of looking at the TV, and it's feeling discombobulated, right? Sometimes you just have to sit with that until that becomes your new normal, and maybe you even like it better. And then the rug is not a big deal, or you've decided it's perfect, right? So give it 2 weeks. But with hair color, I literally gave it 2 days and was calling them back and being like, I can't, I just can't. So I'll be going back Saturday and hopefully they can change this because if they don't change this, I might be going back to just for men. Seriously. Because I dropped some fat cash on this hair and it's horrible. And it's so disheartening to be like, I'm finally going to invest. I'm finally going to treat myself. And then you just feel disappointed, right? And I don't want you to feel that way with your redesign. There are things you can do, but make sure you take a pause first. All right, I have lots of great questions in my mailbag. Guys, if you've had questions that you've been thinking about, should I ask Betsy? Should I hire a designer? Well, it couldn't hurt to just shoot it to me and let me see what I can do before you go to one of the pros. All you have to do is head over to affordableinteriordesign.com/podcast. Once again, affordableinteriordesign.com/podcast, and you're going to see everything there. So you're going to see a button where you can join our premium membership, which is awesome and helps support the show. You'll see a button where you can write me with a question and I'll be sure to get on it. Include pictures so I can really get specific. Lots of things to do. And we're actually changing the website and making it even better right now with tons of transcripts and other exciting things to share. All right, everybody. Well, without further ado, let me get into this mailbag. 1 second here. Okay, my first question comes from Rachel. Rachel writes, hi, Betsy. I'm in the midst of planning a renovation for my home in Ohio, and I'm searching for the ideal interior designer to help me achieve a balanced and inviting atmosphere. What factors should I consider when selecting a designer who can effectively blend the practical needs of suburban living with my desire for a contemporary yet cozy aesthetic? Rachel. All right, Rachel. Well, there's lots to think about and lots of questions to be asking. But the first thing you want to do is get really clear on your vision. What do you want this new space to look like? What ideas do you have? Now, one great way to generate ideas is to look at different websites of interior designers in your area. So, Googling interior designers and looking through their portfolios and seeing if there's images of their work that resonates with you. You're like, oh, I wish my kitchen looked like that. I wish my bathroom had that tile. That might mean that you found somebody who's a style fit, who can help you to even guide or expand your vision based on sort of initial ideas you have. And then she'll have, or he will have other ideas to layer upon them to push you even further and make it even more fabulous than you've thought of. Now, if you've looked at the different websites and you haven't felt a strong connection, or you felt a connection, but then further inquired and they're too expensive or just, sort of outside of what you're thinking, then the other option is to go to places like house.com, apartmenttherapy.com. There's so many different places now, and getting a real clear picture of what you're looking for. So when you do find someone to hire, you can show them the images of the results you're hoping for. Now, once you've got those images, once you've got a really clear sense of what inviting and balanced means to you, because to me as an interior designer, those are very vague. And I would be asking a lot more questions around that with my client. The next thing that you want to decide is how you want to work with your designer. Do you want them to manage the contractor? Do you want them to bring the contractor? Do you not have someone who can do this? Do you also need architecture services? Do you want them to be the person who's kind of the go-between in terms of conversating with the architect and creating that plan? Or is this something where you already have a contractor you love? You don't need an architect, or you already have someone you love, and you just want to design element, to be folded in conjunction. You almost want to use the designer as a consultant, and you'll bring her ideas to those other vendors. Okay. So, of course, if you pick a designer who has relationships with an architect and a contractor, it's going to be more expensive. Typically, it's going to be a percentage of the entire project. Oftentimes, the designer will take 15% of the entire project to work with those people collaboratively and to recommend design decisions. However, if you work with a firm like mine at Affordable Interior Design, we give you all the design selections, but we don't have a relationship with the contractor or architect. So you're going to be the person who relays the messages to them, or you can pay us by the hour to have a collaborative talk with them. But we're not managing their day-to-day progress. We're not keeping them on track timeline-wise, and we're also not telling them how much to order. They're going to be ordering the quantity that they feel is sufficient for the job. So, thinking about how robust you want that relationship to be, and certainly your answer might be based on how robust the project is, right? But thinking about that in advance will let you know sort of how much to allocate to paying for this person. Hopefully, that's given you some good places to start, Rachel, but you want to make sure, unlike my hair, that the outcome that you're hoping for at the beginning is relayed very specifically to every professional on the team so that you're getting the outcome you desired at the end of this long, expensive, and commitment filled project. I hope that helped.
And now it's time for a quick commercial break.
All right, let me go to my next question, which comes from Tim. Tim is from right here in Connecticut, just a stone's throw from me in Stamford. And he writes, I've moved into a charming yet compact apartment, and I'm really keen on optimizing every inch of space. Could you share some expert advice on selecting furniture pieces that serve dual purposes or that have built-in storage? Also, how can I create a stylish atmosphere while ensuring that this space is functional and clutter-free? I'm particularly interested in hearing about innovative layout ideas and decor tips that maximize the visual appeal while also helping my space to stay practical. All right, Tim. Well, that's a lot to think about, especially without seeing images or a floor plan where I can give you specific strategies to apply to your apartment. Now, one thing I like everybody to think of, especially as a former small space dweller myself, I lived in a series of tiny apartments from 50 square feet in terms of studio spaces to 225 square feet, is that When you're expecting every piece to do double duty, to be multifunctional, to have, you know, different kinds of uses in terms of the coffee table becomes a dining table, becomes ottomans for seating, becomes all these different things, right? I call it the MacGyver effect. When you're expecting these pieces to do so many different things, sometimes they don't do any one thing well. Or sometimes you find that you've got these multifunctional pieces that may have been more expensive than just a standard piece, and you're not really using them all the time in terms of using that storage, using that table, pulling out the ottomans, etc. So I don't always recommend making each piece in a small space multifunctional because sometimes things that do too many things don't actually do any one thing very well. All right, so that's just a little overview. In terms of pieces that I do really like in a small space, I do really like a Murphy bed. Now, the reason I like a Murphy bed is not because you can do more things in the space, because unless it's one of those tricked out ones that turns into a bookcase, which turns into a desk, which turns into a sofa, which turns into a whatever, it's really just going to be a bed, right? And when you lift that bed up, it's really just going to be open space. You don't want to constantly be lifting the bed up and then moving a table into the space. So it's really just more openness. It makes the space feel more available and allows you to have a bigger bed in these small spaces. Now, of course, it's dependent on how small your space is because the Murphy bed is also an investment. It can be expensive, but I just love the practicality. And in my 225 square foot space, I wish when I lived there that I'd had the funds and the wherewithal to invest in this piece. Because for $1,500, having that additional floor space day to day, I think would have been a game changer. It was always so tight and cramped, and I had a futon, so it would fold itself in half, which was helpful. But I really could have used that extra 3 feet as well. So think about a Murphy bed. I do like a multifunctional coffee table to a point. I actually bought one for my space, my family room downstairs. We like to eat while we watch TV. It's like a special treat for my kids to watch old reruns of Deal or No Deal or Naked and Afraid while we eat. Watching Naked and Afraid while you eat's not the best idea, by the way, just because they skin a lot of snakes and things like that, and maybe that's not something you wanna see while you're eating noodles. Also, you wanna think about the age appropriateness of your children. I like the idea of my children watching people naked go fishing and build huts because there's a lot of body positivity, and you kind of become a little, desensitized and you become familiar with lots of different types of bodies versus just like models and things. Anyway, I did not mean to go off on this tangent, Tim, but it's been a new obsession of mine. I watch every night multiple episodes, and my daughter has now become really obsessed. And we watched Naked and Afraid and Eat Noodles and watched them skin a snake just last night. Anyway, I find that the coffee table always has remotes and a box of Kleenex and things on top. So converting it to that dining table was rare, and it wasn't necessarily an easy lift, even though it was hydraulic. Then inside there was storage, but the stuff we kept putting in there, we kept forgetting about because it was so infrequently accessed. And then it did have ottomans underneath for seating because I thought, well, what if we have friends with a game, right? And we want to sit them all around. But the ottomans just got really messy and were constantly being pulled out. Or when we would shift the coffee table to lift up that tabletop, then it would move the coffee table in such a way that the ottomans would get displaced and just look very messy. So, unfortunately, the top of that coffee table broke the other day. It's like a ceramic top and it just cracked. And so I had to move it out and put just a normal coffee table in its place until I'm willing to select something new. And I find that just the basic, boring coffee table is actually serving us much better and looks much cleaner and less cluttery. So that's the other thing about a multifunctional piece is sometimes if it has so many bits and bobbles and extensions and things like that, the piece itself can just look cluttery and overwhelming in a small space. Sometimes something simplistic like a coffee table on legs, can really be so liberating for a space because air can flow underneath. It feels lighter. It just feels more spatially appropriate and less heavy in such a restricted space. I do love in a small space thinking vertically, going up the walls and making use of the space's height versus just its actual square footage on the floor. I love a bookcase. I love a bookcase with baskets. I love a storage armoire or cabinet. Really thinking about using the height as a place not only for storage, but for function. Can I mount the TV a little bit higher and use the top of the TV console, as a place to put baskets, or use something slightly higher than a console that I can use as a storage cabinet and then angle the TV down a little bit? Just thinking more about what other ways can I use this space. I remember in my 225 square foot studio, I put a ledge up around the perimeter of the bathroom. And the ledge was about 7 feet up and about 10 inches deep. And it was perfect for holding extra towels, extra supplies in terms of additional shampoos, specialty makeups, things like this. I really got so much bang for my buck from that little shelf that went around the perimeter of the bathroom and never conflicted with what I wanted to do in there because it was so high. Well, Tim, that may not have answered every question. If there are additional questions, just write me, go to affordableinteriordesign.com/podcast, and I will answer them for you. But I know that that's going to get you started and get you thinking about how to live well in this small space. Last question from the day comes from Leslie. She writes, "Hi there. I've become the proud owner of a historic home in Litchfield, Connecticut in the countryside. I am absolutely thrilled. I'm faced with the challenge of maintaining its character while making it feel livable and stylish for today's standards. How can I balance preserving the original architectural details, like stunning moldings and hardwood floors, while incorporating modern amenities and trends? I want to create a space that honors the home's heritage while still feeling fresh. Any ideas or creative tips? Thanks, Leslie." All right. So it depends what era your home is from. One thing that I like to consider is keeping the paint palette or the colors I use historical, but picking out contemporary furniture so that the color palette goes well with the interior and exterior of the home, but the actual lines and shapes of the pieces feel very of today and can be trendy, if you will, or have characteristics that feel more contemporary. Now, as you know, in my home, which is also in Connecticut, about an hour away from you, but in my home, I've incorporated antiques. My home has so much decorative trim and so many ornate carvings that it really would feel not problematic, but it would feel like maybe I'm avoiding what's naturally, organically happening in the space if I didn't lean into that a little bit. So I combined contemporary pieces with antique pieces, lots of ornate antique frames in terms of mirrors and pictures, a coffee table that has very filigreed gold legs, layering it with contemporary pieces. So that my two-word phrase was mid-century, well, I think it was fancy mid-century modern. And the fancy was able to incorporate those antiques without it feeling truly historic in terms of the overall feel, because I'm always layering those two words throughout. So when I have that historical coffee table that does have the filigreed gold legs with the marble top that's got this cool faceting that I got at an auction for $35. Anyway, then I layer what's on top of it and I make sure that it's very contemporary. So I did a tray from West Elm that's in a bold color. On top of the tray, I put a couple of coffee table books that do not reference olden days, but rather my current adventures and current hobbies and interests. So be thinking about that as you're trying to style if you do choose to incorporate older items or even antique items. But I really feel like that color palette is such a fun and easy way to apply history to a space without being so literal. And if you Google, you can find amazing color palettes. So do Victorian color palette, find that year of your home and then go online and Google whatever year or era your home was built in, and then Google paint palette, color palette, and you'll find there's so much yummy stuff on Google. Just search. The other day, I was designing a house mid-century modern, and they didn't necessarily want to do only mid-century modern furniture, but I was just recommending paint, and they wanted some rooms to be kind of poppy and bright. And so I went to that historical mid-century modern paint palette, and we found some amazing options that look really organic and in tune with the space. Leslie, I hope that gave you some ideas. Keep us posted on your journey and your decisions. I can't wait to see how everything turns out. Guys, send me your questions, and I will be back here with you again next week for even more exciting design. Till then, bye.
A big thank you to our amazing producer, Katherine Heller, to Aton and the MVCR House Band, and to Affordable Interior Design, the sponsor of this podcast and the premier place to get an amazing look on a budget. Check out affordableinteriordesign.com. If you guys love the show, the very best way to support us is by spreading the word. Tell your friends or write us an awesome review on iTunes. So until next week, guys, thanks so much for joining us, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.